a
oh, cool. From the other day when we
yeah. Well, the training was before, but you sit down and they say put in this name and da 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 da. And that's the name that they're.
okay. Yeah. And is that Stefan?
Yes. Can we run through
Your image up
polls? Artists used to work, yes.
Did you draw it?
No.
Somebody was an intern.
Yes.
Years ago.
Used to be the website.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Brittany, I detect the presence of a quorum, so, okay. So good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. My name is Hank DeLay, and I serve as the chair of this Tompkins County Independent Redistricting Commission. I welcome everybody to our proceedings. I believe we have a quorum, so let us begin, and I'll ask Brittany to call the roll.
Hank DeLay,
Here.
Jeffrey True,
Here.
Carolyn Chang, I believe is excused from this meeting. She could not make it. Charles Nocera.
Here.
Elliot Emel. Here. Jan Bink.
Here.
Marcia Lynch. Margaret Hobby. Here. Vivek Iyer.
Here.
Okay, thank you all very much. You have received a proposed agenda in advance of the meeting. Without objection, I would like to amend it and to insert a new number 4, and that will be a statement by me, a review of the Independent Redistricting Commission process. Without objection, it's amended. Thank you. We have minutes from the meeting of May 24th. Can I have a motion for their approval?
So move.
Seconded, moved by Jeff, seconded by Margaret. Any discussion? All in favor indicate saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next item on our agenda, as it has been for all of our meetings, is input from legislators, municipal officials, and the public. And to begin, I believe, Greg, you would like to start off because you have another meeting elsewhere?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the commission's allowing me to go and speak first so I can make my other engagement this evening. I have intentionally stayed away from these meetings because I believe in the independent nature of the commission and that the commission should remain independent. I realize that our charter and everything allows us to send information back or send a request back to the commission for consideration. I was one of the legislators that voted against sending it back, as I support the work that you all have done. Since now that there is a new opportunity to solicit feedback in this session, the only thing that I wanted to say was first, again, I feel strongly that we need to keep this process independent. And so my comments come from just a place of wanting to make sure that as you relook at and you consider potentially maybe other scenarios with an odd number, as a representative of the western portion of Dryden, I would just ask that you consider the rural communities and the boundary lines of those towns and rural communities, and try not to create an environment where there's districts that have multiple overlap with several different municipalities. I think in the past we've seen strong lines, and it would be, my hope that you could, as you look at the city and how it aligns with different districts down there, also keep in mind those rural parts of the county as well, so that representation is not spread too far over too many different municipalities. That's really my only comment. Again, I just want to reiterate the sentiment that I think that this should be an independent process. I appreciate all of the work that you did. And, I look forward to watching and hearing your deliberations. And I'm also, not a believer that we can't make an even number work on the legislature as we have in the past, and hopefully we'll continue to do. So again, thank you for your time. But I just wanted to come in and share those few thoughts with you today.
Thank you very much, Greg. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Greg? I'll have one then, and just since you raised the issue of the western part of the town of Dryden, do you feel comfortable with how that area that you represent has been dealt with in our recommendation to the county legislature in map 16 V3E?
Yes, I do. I think that there's currently a portion of Dryden as it currently exists that's represented by Lee Shirtliff's district. I know that in the new 16 that a little bit of that gets extended into his district. But I think that having large chunks represented by members of the legislature that represent the town in its entirety, as I looked at some of the odd number seats as well, a lot of that can get broken up in some ways. I think in the 15 seat scenario, there was only one where the town of Dryden and other parts of the county sort of remained. There was a couple different options where it's Dryden, Caroline, town of Ithaca. So that's really where I'm coming from with my statement. But again, I've supported the work that you've done and the process in which you've underwent from the beginning, and I'm cautious to weigh in outside of these opportunities to do so, because I do want it to remain as independent as possible.
Again, thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
this evening. Next, I see two members of the legislature here. One is present, and Travis has his hand up first, says Mike Lane. So Travis Brooks, welcome.
Thank you for reconvening the group. Like Greg, for several reasons, I came to one meeting. I didn't have a lot to say. I wanted to watch and see how things, transpired. I'm new to redistricting in this way as a legislator. I haven't been part of it before. So I wanted to see what the process was about. I do believe in the independence of the committee. But there were some things that stood out to me that I wanted to have looked at again. Some of my concerns may not be things that you all could have looked at or taken into consideration, so I understand that. But as a representative of District 1, there were a few things that stood out. One, we actually increased the number of legislators, which I'm fine with, but the geographical size and footprint of District 1 grew. It used to stop at the top of West Hill, and now it goes out to the town line of Trumansburg. So the footprint is kind of big. It goes from Spencer Road all the way out to the town line of Trumansburg. But more of my issue had to do with, to me, what seemed like kind of carving out the middle of the flats, from Cascadilla over to, I believe it's Green Street. Part of that is the heart of the north side to me, and to many of us that lived on the north side for a long time. And we know that in the area in between, there's quite a few people who are active in the political process. By going out towards Trumansburg, we have encumbered another low-income housing project. So almost all of the low-income housing complexes are now part of District 1. So as far as representation, it's only one representative for the majority of low-income housing in the city and outside of the city going toward the town. So those were two or three of my issues. What's adjacent to the Fall Creek area is the north side where I live. And if the idea was to add more to that area, it seems like it would have been natural to include what was right next door to Fall Creek instead of kind of going to the tip of Fall Creek and then adding the middle of the flats. So those were a few of the things that concerned me. I definitely respect y'all's work and y'all's decision. And if you decide that this is what it should look like, I respect that and support it without any problem. But I do know that we had an opportunity to have it looked at again. And so I wanted to bring those things up, and they may not even be things that can be under your consideration.
Thank you very much, Travis. Again, I'll ask if any of the other members of the commission have any questions for Travis Brooks. Yeah.
Travis, this is Jeff True. When the city met and put its map together, did you have the same concerns with the city map? And if so, did you bring it to their attention?
No, I have not brought it to the city's attention. I have not focused on that at all. I was only focusing on the county and in the area that I was a representative of. I respect the work that was done. So, I don't represent that area in that way. I'm a county legislator, so I just was focused on the county redistricting.
Okay, thank you. I will just note, Travis, one interesting issue that you raised deals with having a concentration of low-income persons in a single district. And, my own belief is that it would be desirable to have more opportunities for lower income persons to live throughout all of the city of Ithaca. But one of the questions that arises under our statutory guidelines for redistricting is whether the separation of existing low-income districts or areas that are in a particular district into several districts would potentially cause a reduction in the opportunity for minority voting power. If we've talked about splitting districts for partisan political purposes. One of the concerns in the statute is minority voting opportunity, and separating low-income areas into multiple districts could, in the view of some folks, constitute a reduction in their ability to have an impact in that particular district. So again, just something to think about as we go forward.
Thank you.
Next, Mike Lane.
Thank you for reconvening and
It's our job.
taking a look at what the resolution from the legislature asked for. I was one of the majority that asked for this to come back to you for another examination of the issues of whether there should be an odd number of legislators and whether we should, I'm losing my train of thought here, but the reason we sent it back was because it was a part of the process. It was a possible part of the process of the charter that we had adopted, both by resolution and then by the actual action of the legislature to make it a part of the charter during the last charter review committee. I was looking at a charter review committee that we had way back in 1995, and we looked at a lot of issues. And at that time, they were recommending that there be an odd number of legislators. I know, Mr. Chairman, when you came in to talk to us about the report, and we certainly appreciated that, you said at that time that you had discussed that issue, but that you thought that the legislature, if there was an even number, the legislature could work that out. Well, many times that happens, but we're in a very odd situation right now, and it's not necessarily this commission's responsibility. But we have people who are underrepresented until 2026, the election of 2025. This legislature had an opportunity to send to the voters the possibility of changing its terms that were elected last fall to a 2-year term so that we could redistrict quicker and have equal representation. I, for one, am a firm believer that we need to have equal representation. And I'm awfully afraid now that we might have to look at the issue of weighted voting because we are going so long before whatever you recommend will be implemented for districts. Meanwhile, you're going to have people that are overrepresented according to the census and people that are underrepresented. And that's not equal protection. That's not what our Constitution talks about. So I really think that I'd certainly, for one, would really appreciate your taking another look at the issues that were brought up in the resolution that was sent to you. You can send us back what you originally suggested. That's in your prerogative. That's what happened 10 years ago. You can send us an alternate or a change. That's your independence to do that. I believe the legislature will, in my opinion, support the action here. But we do think it's important enough that there is enough time that some of these other issues should be brought to the forefront. The other point I would make is that we are no longer a board of supervisors. Tompkins County changed from being a board of supervisors to being a chartered county many years ago. When it was a board of supervisors, of course, it was governed by supervisors from each of the elected from the towns, and then there were districts within the city, of course. And so when they changed to a charter form of government with legislators, they were called representatives back then, elected from geographic districts, they initially started with the towns because that's where the supervisors had come from. But there, with the population shift and the Supreme Court decisions back then that said you had to have equal protection and one person, one vote. And unless they did a weighted voting system, which they tried for a little while and people hated it, then they had to redistrict. And some of those lines had to go across boundaries, and they still do. And I understand the desire to have the coterminous boundaries in the city with the wards. But it's all right if you cross boundaries. We've done it ever since we became a legislature. You got to look at places like Groton and Dryden and Lansing and Enfield, for example. It's all right that you do that because county legislators represent people. They don't represent towns anymore or the city anymore, except they represent the people in those municipalities. So I guess that's the point I would want to make tonight. Thank you for letting me talk again.
And thank you, Mike, for being with us this evening. Again, any questions for Mike from any member of the commission? Looking up at our members on the screen. No. Okay. Next on the agenda then is, as the agenda was amended, is the statement that I'm going to make reviewing the work of the Independent Redistricting Commission and its process. Thank you all very much. For the benefit of the members of the public and media who are watching these proceedings via Zoom or watching a recorded replay, I'd like to go over the basic rules that govern the work of the Independent Redistricting Commission over the 6 months of our deliberations. First, we were governed by the statutory guidelines for local government redistricting. These are found in the Municipal Home Rule Law and were most recently amended by the state legislature and signed into law by Governor Hochul in 2021. Districts shall have population equality as near as practicable within 5% from smallest to largest district, a notable change from the 10% deviation standard that had previously been in effect for many decades. Districts shall neither deny nor abridge minority voting rights. And I referenced that earlier in the conversation with Legislator Brooks. Districts must be contiguous. Districts cannot favor or disfavor incumbents, particular candidates, or political parties. Districts should consider existing district cores, political subdivisions, and communities of interest. Villages, cities, and towns shall not be divided unless they constitute 40% of the population of an average district. And districts should promote the orderly and efficient administration of elections. So those are all laid out specifically in New York state law. And those are the fundamental requirements that we are obliged to follow. Second, we are constrained by the provisions of the Tompkins County Charter, which indicates that the size of the county legislature can range from 11 to 19 members. I would note that nothing in the county charter calls for the size of the county legislature to be an odd number of members. Third, although section C-2.10 of the county charter, which deals with the subject of reapportionment, specifies that the county legislature shall, and I quote, adopt a detailed charge to the commission that sets forth the principal constitutional, statutory, and policy considerations for the commission's deliberations, along with a deadline for the submission of the commission's report, unquote. No such policy considerations or deadline were provided to the commission. Fourth, to reduce public confusion in reference to overlapping ward boundaries and county legislative districts within the city of Ithaca, the proposed district lines in the draft final report, with only two minor exceptions, followed the proposed ward boundaries then under consideration by the City of Ithaca Common Council. To the best of my knowledge, no member of the county legislature raised any statutory objection to the ward boundaries under consideration by the Common Council. Those ward boundaries were subsequently unanimously approved by Common Council and will go into effect on January 1, 2023. Fifth, from the initial meeting of the Commission on December 14th, 2021, the Commission has encouraged public input at every session, and our agendas have repeatedly called for, and I quote, input from legislators, municipal officials, and the public. On November 16th, 2021, the day the members of this commission were appointed by the county legislature, I specifically invited members of the legislature to share their views with the commission. I emphasized, however, that their comments should be on the record and made at commission meetings, not through individual phone calls, emails, or other forms of private communication. We would require transparency throughout this process, and that is how we operated. Over the course of the next 6 months, 6 current members of the county legislature took advantage of this opportunity to provide input to the commission. 2 others participated via Zoom or attended in person, but had no comments to offer. 2 current legislators and 1 former legislator urged the commission to adopt an odd number of districts, and 2 current legislators recommended a reduction in the size of the legislature. No member of the legislature attended or submitted written comments at the public input session of the commission on May 10th, 2022, a meeting that was specifically scheduled to receive comments on the draft final report. The Independent Redistricting Commission submitted its unanimously approved final report to the county legislature at its meeting on May 24th, 2022. Throughout our deliberations, a total of 23 alternative maps had been considered, ranging in size from 13 to 17 districts. It was the judgment of the commission that map 16 version 3-E best met and balanced the statutory criteria established for local redistricting by the municipal home rule law. On August 10th, 2022, the county legislature adopted resolution number 2022-139, responding to the commission's report. The resolution thanked the commission for our efforts and then requested us to reconsider our recommendations in light of several factors. The financial costs associated with the proposed increase in the size of the legislature from 14 to 16 members, the potential for legislative disruption due to tie votes in an even-numbered legislature, the potential adverse impact of our proposed boundary between districts 1 and 2 as it affects low-income housing residents, and the compactness of proposed District 1. With this as background, we will now turn our attention to options for addressing the concerns that have been brought to the Commission's attention by resolution number 2022-139. I have requested our staff to review our proposed map 16 version 3-E and to prepare and present several alternative maps ranging from 11 to 15 districts in number. Each of these alternative maps meet the equal population standard of 5% deviation or less between the most and least populous districts. I'll pause there and simply ask first if any member of the commission has any further comment to make in reference to the remarks that I've just given. Jeff?
Hank, the list of the criteria that Governor Hochul signed is not necessarily in a prioritization order, right? They all have equal weight or they do not?
No, they do not. The standard for population equivalence of 5% or less is the first and most significant priority, and the others follow in lower priority after that. Margaret.
Like to make a comment. There's nothing we can do about it, but I spent 16 hours as an elections inspector yesterday, and I've done it 2 other times in the past year. And it's given me tremendous respect for our local board of elections. And, you know, it's very interesting to learn about the whole process. And I think, I'm sorry that orderly and efficient administration of elections is at the bottom of this list, because I think that really gets to the heart of this, to people's ease of voting and knowing where to go and, you know, being able to get there. I think it's wonderful that we now have early voting options, but that adds a new level of confusion to where do you vote. And I just, yeah, I think what's good for the Board of Elections is good for the public. And that we should keep in mind ease of voting and knowledge of where you go to vote and what the process is.
Thank you, Margaret.
I just want to pipe in really quick. We need to make sure we all talk into our mics so that people on Zoom and YouTube can hear us.
Thank you. Which one's the mic? Oh, that's a light. That's a light.
Comments from any other member of the commission? No? Well, with that then, we'll begin with a presentation by our staff director, Greg Potter.
Okay, I'm going to ask Svetla to share her screen and we can jump back and forth between the work that we've done since we've decided to meet again. So starting with the version of that was forwarded to the legislature as proposed by this commission, which is 16 V3E. So before I move from there, any questions about what was submitted before we get into some of the alternatives that were odd alternatives below 16?
Well, the comment I would ask Greg initially is when the commission unanimously voted in support of this particular recommendation to the county legislature, it was our opinion that it fully met all of the criteria established by the state for local redistricting, including such factors as considering political subdivisions and communities of interest. Is there anything that has come to your attention in the time since the commission made that determination that would change our view of whether we are in full compliance with all of those criteria?
Question for me, no. We've met, I think we still meet all the criteria as laid out. No exceptions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Greg about 16?
Okay. So Svetla and I afterwards did a bit of work, and Hank was involved in some of those efforts that we met and coordinated and produced some additional maps as were requested. And we're going to start with the 15 scenario options. The first one being 15V6. So Svetla, if you'd open that for me, please. And our first attempt at a new version of 15 was one in which we followed the city ward boundaries exactly. So we were trying to see what it would look like if we just continued with the logic of following the city ward boundaries. And this was our best attempt in doing so. It shifts things around quite a bit in some of the areas. A big difference here is that, Dryden would be, it ends up with 4 districts. And the district on the west side of the town of Ithaca extends into Enfield and part of Newfield as well as kind of like an Ellis Hollow through Caroline district. So that was the best we could come up with following the city ward boundaries that were adopted exactly and meeting the criteria. So there is from the city outward, there's one area on District 5 that extends into Hasbrook Apartments for balancing that out. And then from District 1, extending into the West Hill area for the town of Ithaca a bit, including Lindeman Creek area as well. That's where the population was added to District 1 to balance it off.
District 4 appears to go substantially into.
Yes, I'm sorry, District 4, yes, and District 4 extends into the town of Ithaca and Maplewood apartment area as well for the population over there. So to meet the boundaries that were established for the city wards exactly, it means that the city districts have to gain population and extend out into the town, and that's done through 1, 2, 3, 4 locations into the town. Okay.
Let me just ask if any of our colleagues have questions about this particular version. Jan?
Just wondering if it was probably necessary to have Freeville and Dryden in separate districts.
Yeah, we could not balance the population at the leading criteria for 5% deviation without doing that. There's some other scenarios that we worked on to keep those two together for 15 that I'll show you in a second. So this is our first attempt, and the priority there was just to see what would happen if we matched the city ward boundaries exactly for 15. The initial versions that we did for 15 for this group, at the time, we focused on 15 at the start of the initiative or the project, but the city project in their redistricting wasn't far enough along. So some of the assumptions we made for legislative districts in the city were kind of random, not random, but based on history and practice and less so on the commission from the city and the work that they did.
So for District 1 in this particular scenario, in recognizing that District 1 has the lowest density of any of the city districts, instead of the proposal that was in map 16 that went up along the lake, this proposal meets that population balance requirement by going straight west on West Hill. And as you said, I think it goes up through the Lindeman Creek Apartments, but not all the way to the town border. Is that?
Yeah, that is correct. It just goes past west of Lindeman Creek apartment areas and takes in just those suburban areas of the town of Ithaca and that apartment complex to gain the population that we needed to balance the populations.
Right. And another factor in retaining the idea of 5 representatives from the city, in addition to overlapping boundaries of the wards within the city, is that the city, in relation to the rest of the county, expanded its population at a greater rate than the towns and villages of the rest of the county.
population increases in the city were, I can't remember exactly, but there are only a couple municipalities that expanded at that rate. So the city being one of them. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Brittany.
Jeff?
Greg, for the benefit of the public or the individuals listening, would you just talk about one of the limitations that you have? And that is that you cannot break up census blocks. Because some people might say, oh, let's just take Lindeman Creek and cut it in half, or take some other area and just cut it in half. And you can't do that.
That is correct. We cannot legally split census blocks in the population in this process. So some of the blocks are unusually large because of dormitories or large apartment complexes, and they're all contained within a single block.
And the census blocks are provided to us by the U.S. Bureau of the Census. We don't generate them.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next map that we're going to discuss tonight, which was one that the commission previously viewed, and that is 15V3. And we did a number of 15 versions that did not follow the city ward boundaries exactly. So as I said, these were all done initially before the ward boundaries were determined. So we went back through those 5 scenarios that we did for 15 and said, okay, what is the best one to discuss or bring forward this evening as a starting point? And Hank and Svetlana and I all settled on 15V3. And so we're going to start, again, in the city, if you don't mind. And we've also done maps that overlay, and I'll show you that in a second, the city with the city adopted ward boundaries versus what you're seeing here. So you can see what the election districts may look like if you want to pursue this. So you'll see the sliver districts or the alternatives of the areas that don't match the order of the districts completely between city wards and legislative districts. So legislative district 1 for the city is pretty much the west side of the city and the southwest corner, and extends into the town of Ithaca all the way up to the border. It does not include the traditional definition of the north side or the central Martin Luther King, East State Street, Washington Park corridor. The other city district, which extends into another municipality, the town of Ithaca, is District 5, which goes up towards Renwick Heights and East Shore Drive as well, all the way up to the boundary with the town or village of Lansing. The other 3 districts in the city are contained within the city completely. This scenario, unfortunately, leads to a split for the village of Lansing into 2 different districts. The District 6, which is the entirety of Cayuga Heights, and the central section of the village of Lansing. And then the east part of Lansing and the west part of Lansing and the village get associated with the town of Lansing district, which extends all the way up the lake shore to the edge of the county boundary. So in this scenario, what we also started in concept was, would it be possible to do districts along the east side and the west side of the lake entirely? So this is that scenario. District 7 includes all of the length of the shoreline with the exception of West City, and District 15 extends down into the town as well along the Route 89 corridor all the way up to the border as well, and down to 79 and part of the western part of Enfield. And I'm going to have you show Svella for me any general questions before we do the overlay of the adopted city ward boundaries that were approved and go live on January 1st, 2023.
Well, the first question I would have, Greg, is how is it that, remembering that we were looking at this particular map early in our deliberations several months ago, prior to the city's action on its ward boundaries, how is it that possible to split the village of Lansing? I thought that was not permitted under the statute.
The statute says that village, cities, and towns shall not be divided unless they constitute 40% of the population of an average district. So we'd have to look at the details to determine whether that's true or not, or meets the criteria.
My recollection at the time was that the village did meet that 40% standard. And that's the
Yeah, so
reason
that's the reason we did it.
it was split, even though it might not be a desirable thing to do, but in order to meet the population deviation standard, you had to do it.
Right. And so we ran some numbers preliminarily to make sure that it met that criteria, but I'd have to rerun those again just to confirm it. So if we want to pursue this one, I'd have to do a little bit more math to make certain that we meet that criteria. But this, if I believe this one was primarily rejected because it split the village of Lansing. That was the issue with this one.
Right. Comments from anyone? We didn't like this one back when. Do you feel any better about it now, or?
I personally do not. As I've said before, I really do not like the configuration and how it affects the town and village of Lansing. Other than that, I don't see that there are serious problems. But the other aspect, as I recall, that I do not like is the fact that District 1 in the city goes all the way out to the Ithaca-Enfield town line. And I am concerned about the communities of interest criteria there.
Thank you, Marcia. And I just will interrupt for a moment, since on the screen, I can't see member of our commission, Chuck Nocera or Vivek Iyer. I don't know if they're indicating they want to say anything or not. They are.
So far, just listening.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to check. Okay, great.
Okay, I'm going to ask Svetla to show us the same map, but with the overlay of the adopted city ward boundaries, and that would be the purple lines. Can you zoom in a little bit to on the right-hand side? So what was adopted by the city are the purple lines on the right-hand side, and 16V3, the colors behind that are what we just spoke of. So there's a couple little sections in there that would be problematic. Right below District 3 and 4, there's a sliver that would have to be addressed from the Board of Elections. The whole north side becomes different, and then part of the south side below Green Street there. So and then part of College Town as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas.
And then I correct in, again, our basic understanding that the growth of the population in the city is primarily on the eastern side of the city, which ultimately, to accommodate that, pushes districts toward the west to accommodate the growth. That's why District 1 ends up not fitting within the city boundary itself, and has to move out into the town of Ithaca.
Right, and then exactly the population density for the west side of the city of Ithaca is not nearly as populous as the other parts of the city. Yep.
And any questions for Greg? Jan?
In the county charter, it says something about slivers that they should be avoided. This would probably not be in line with the county charter.
It would be, there are rules that there would have to be separate election districts drawn up for each one of those sliver districts or areas. And some of them might have the population to support an election district. Some may not. And they, that one in particular around, you know, so we'd have to look at the possibility of moving that one way, or, you know, making that all part of 3 instead of 4 if there's still enough room, because we can grow a little bit and we can take a little away from 4 to 3. So we have to play around with the boundaries on the edges to work that out for BOE if we pursue this one. For any of them, by the way.
And just to confirm again for the members of the media and the public who may be watching this either live or on a recorded basis, the Board of Elections was quite pleased with the recommendation that we did make for the 16 version 3-E as meeting their needs in terms of the administration of the election. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the 13 scenario. We're gonna, we did about 3 different versions of 13, one which we reviewed with you in the past, which is V1. We took another shot at that for V2 and V3. Between V2 and V3, V2 was worth, you know, bringing to your attention. V3 was a bit of a nightmare. So starting again in the city.
Excuse me, a bit of a nightmare is a technical.
Yeah, sorry. It balanced. It met the first criteria, but then it fell apart with all the others. So I didn't even bother presenting to you. And my apologies for not printing and giving you maps this evening. Our ITS printer bit the dust about 2 weeks ago and hasn't been replaced since. So anyway, within the city at 13, the math is pretty good. And there's only one area of the city that needed to be bumped out, which is the Maplewood area for the apartments between districts 3 and district 6. So we'll talk about that in a second. But in both the districts, the scenarios for 13 and 11 that we produced, we did not follow any city ward boundaries as well. So we've got those overlaid as well. So this is our approach to trying to make them the balance of the city at 13 legislative districts and in keeping them as much contained in the city as possible. But we had to bump out somewhere, and we chose that area that I just presented. District 1 in this scenario wraps around to grab the population in South Hill. And District 2 is traditionally Fall Creek, north side, traditional north side, and downtown and up into College Town. And then you've got District 4, which is pretty much the bulk of the population is going to be Cornell in the dorms. And District 3 is Bell Sherman and part of campus as well. Moving around the county, Ulysses, Trumansburg, and Enfield stays contained, which is kind of nice. District 9, which is Newfield centric, takes in half of Danby, let's say, including the Danby core, the hamlet, and the southwest corner of the town of Ithaca. District 7 in the town of Ithaca, which is totally within the town of Ithaca, wraps around and grabs the Ithaca College area and the population from IC. So that one is a little bit unusual that we had to follow the block lines to get to that area. So that's a common problem to keep the town of Ithaca intact, as well as to, on the west side, you really have to include Ithaca College at some level. Otherwise, you have to extend into District 6 then becomes the eastern side of the town of Ithaca and is pretty clean and wraps all the way up to the border with Lansing. So that's nice. And in this scenario, the village and Cayuga Heights in the village of Lansing and the East Shore Drive and Renwick Heights have good, exactly that really good population to balance out and keep those intact. District 13, which is the rest of the town of Lansing, stays intact, which is nice. And then moving around to the other corner, the southeast corner of the county, which is Caroline centric, and then extending all the way up, kind of like Ellis Hollow, and all the way up to 13 in Dryden. And then Dryden includes Freeville, the village of Freeville, and the village of Dryden, and the western part of Dryden in one area or one legislative district. And then in District 12, which is Groton, contains all of Groton and the village of Groton and the northwest corner of Dryden.
So Dryden here has kept the villages together, but is now in 3 different districts. And on, was it District 5 where you said you had the villages of Lansing and Cayuga Heights together?
Yes. And the section in the town of Ithaca along East Shore Drive and Renwick Heights as well. It's a little part of the county there that's not incorporated into the village of Cayuga Heights, which is still part of the town of Ithaca.
Right.
So.
Comments from my colleagues, either here in the chamber or on Zoom? Jan.
I don't like District 7 because of its shape. Yeah. Certainly not a compact district. And I understand the reason why, but yeah, the reason to dislike that.
They managed to be contiguous.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And District 10 also looks a little wild to me. Might be hard for a council person to deal with. No, also, yeah, disenfranchises maybe some of the people.
I do think 10 sort of follows the Caroline school lines, though. We talked about school districts as a community of interest. So I don't think it goes into Danby, but I think that part of Dryden is served by Caroline School. So it makes sense in that way.
Marcia?
I know that during our early deliberations at the initial hearings, there was significant sentiment from people in the Danby and Caroline area to keep those 2 municipalities together. And this alternative would not do that. That is somewhat of a concern to me. Also, splitting Dryden into 3 districts, in my mind, might be too much fragmentation.
I'd just like to make a note that I don't seem to have full resolution PDF files. I had them when we were going through our first round of discussions. It's just, if Greg, if you can send those, full PDFs, I'll be able to zoom in and look at it better from here.
Certainly. Yep.
It's not, you don't have to do it right away, but.
I think this was in the email that Brittany sent out to all of us, Vivek.
Agenda.
Oh, okay.
They were sent on Thursday, August 18th.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask Svetla to show us the same version, but with the overlay of the adopted city ward boundaries as well. So that really just ends up with 1, 2, 3 areas, really, which probably are going to be okay. The population in that area that is on West Campus probably has the population to support an election district because of the dorms. Okay, let's move on to 11. So we did a few versions of 11 as well. And if we did not discuss or review any previous versions of 11 with the commission. So this is the first 11 that you're seeing. We did a few of them, and this is the one that, again, won out in the work that we did to present and discuss this evening. District 1, starting in the city, is comprised of the western part of the city, the central core of the city, north side, south side as well. So District 2 then extends from traditional Fall Creek up into towards the northeast corner of the city in Renwick Heights and the East Shore Drive. Those 2 districts are completely contained within, only one is contained within the city. District 2 includes the East Shore and Renwick Heights. District 3, which is the part of the dorms on campus at Cornell, and some of Bell Sherman, extends into the town of Ithaca towards Hasbrook and towards Forest Home to grab some of the population in there. And District 4, which extends all the way from kind of parts of South Hill and parts of Bell Sherman, extends all the way through the East Hill Plaza, Ellis Hollow corridor towards all the way to the border of the town of Caroline and the town of Danby. If we move around the county in with the same way you did before, we'll start with Ulysses and Enfield and Trumansburg stay together with part of the corner of the town of Ithaca incorporated into that, which probably is from Bundy Road to the north, including the triangle. District 5 in the town of Ithaca is pretty self-contained in the town of Ithaca and wraps around from Bundy all the way around to 6 Mile Creek, including Ithaca College. Newfield and Danby get joined as a single district and part of Caroline, including Brooktondale. The part of Caroline, the remaining part of Caroline gets associated with the western, the southern part of Dryden up to the village, and extends all the way into across 366 and up to 13 into the town of Ithaca, to pull in the population from the northeast corner for the town of Ithaca in that more dense suburban area of the town of Ithaca.
That one's a humdinger.
Mhm.
Really is.
District 10 then becomes part of the eastern part of Groton without the village, all the way down into the northern part of
I'm sorry,
Dryden.
can we just
Yep.
pause for a moment? So we have a question or a comment from Chuck Nocera that just came up on the screen. And Chuck, do you want to tell us what, I don't have a computer in front of me to look at the chat.
You're lucky. I guess my concern is not so much with the layout of the map, but just reducing from 16 districts to 11 translates into about 30,000 voters who are absorbed into larger districts. And it seems to me that the one concern I heard early on was equal representation concern. And, you know, if you move out to 15 and 16 districts, you have a better chance of equalizing the vote, I guess. I hope that made sense.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. The screen shows me that there are 2 comments in the chat. I don't know what the other one might be. Can somebody help us? Oh, okay. Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate it.
I'll continue on with going around the horn here. District 11 includes the village of Groton, the western part of Groton, and the northern part of the town of Lansing, all the way to the lake. And District 9 includes the villages of Lansing and Cute Heights and part of the town of Lansing, just directly north of the village of Lansing.
I mean, so that might be desirable, but what about having the village of Groton not involved with Groton?
That is the problem with this scenario. Yes.
Not to mention number 8, which goes, dare I say, all over the map.
Oh.
Are, but what you had to do to meet the population standard.
Right.
I just was amused that it puts Northeast Elementary School and Speedsville in the same district.
Right. And the next one is just the overlap of the adopted city ward boundaries with that scenario.
Well, I think this one's really problematic, and I can't personally see making one of our recommendations if we're to make recommendations.
Those districts are just too big. And unless we had some kind of a mandate or direction to say we need to reduce the size of the legislature significantly, I don't see any reason to move forward with this.
Yeah, if you did this one, each district has 9,700 people in it, and the 16 version, it's back to 6,500. So that's over 3,200 additional people in each district.
It's a 50% increase per district. Okay. I think I have a consensus that we've put number 11 aside. Okay. Want to go back and talk about the 13 and 15 items and whether we have any of those that members of the commission would believe we should discuss further and consider recommending to the county legislature. Margaret?
I think of the five that were submitted, 15 V6 is the best, but I don't think any of them are as good as 16 V3 E.
I would agree.
Let's take a look at that one then. So here we have the 5 districts in the city. What are the issues on the rest of the county, Greg?
I would say the two biggest issues. One is the way that District 14 gets identified or drawn as the west side of the town of Ithaca and incorporating the southern part of Enfield and part of Newfield is a little unusual. And the division of Dryden into 3 districts.
4?
Oh, I'm sorry, 4 districts. I gotta look up here. 4 districts
Yeah.
is the bigger issue
Right.
here. With Freeville
Yeah.
going to the north and
Yeah.
being separated again from the village of Dryden, which has not been the case at all in the past.
Hank,
Yes.
it also creates a tension in the Caroline Danby area. And we were trying to preserve that.
Exactly.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, maybe this is the time to talk a little bit about responding specifically to the resolution from the chamber, from the legislature. I'm afraid that we might be making policy by looking at numbers rather than answering their specific questions about do you want an even number versus an odd number, and then some of the questions that Travis Brooks has brought up.
I think that's a valid point, Mr. Vice Chairman. And we have that next on the agenda,
Okay.
looking at the specific items. First part of it was looking at revisiting the proposed district map, which we've done. Then what about the necessity, if there is one, of having an odd number of seats? As I said in my comments, there were 2 members of the legislature and 1 former member of the legislature who came to the commission and suggested an odd number as part of their comments to the commission. Not received a direction from the county legislature, or did not, as part of the resolution establishing the commission, to have an odd number. There have been comments about delays in the work of the county legislature as a result of the, as we understand it, the one-time impasse that occurred over the selection of leadership for the county legislature. To my knowledge, no one has brought to the commission's attention whether there were significant legislative or fiscal impairments that arose as a result of that short-term delay. Frustration, no doubt, among the members of the legislature. But, and maybe the county attorney can inform us whether not applications, but the applications and the receipt of grants from the state or the federal government or legislation that may have been required to be undertaken was able to be done in a time frame that was necessary, or was it simply annoying for a short period of time?
I was not yet the full county attorney, so I wasn't with the board all the time when this was happening. I thought it was an annoyance. I thought there was a lot of frustration, but we managed as a people to get through it, it seemed to me. And I'm not aware of any sort of backlash or great problems that resulted. Perhaps Mike Lane may have a different view of it, or somebody else who's appearing remotely. But from my vantage point at the time, it was a bit of an anomaly, but I don't think it wreaked havoc on anybody.
Mike, you were one of the legislators who did speak to us and recommended elaborate in terms of the actual impact.
It went on for a long time,
How long?
about 2 months. And it ended up with the county clerk making a decision on who would be the chair of the legislature for a period of time. Something that is in the charter, but it's rather unusual to have something like that happen. In the meantime, the temporary chair in that situation assumed that he was the actual chair and had to be stopped from appointing committees and other things that the chairmanship required. It was financially that the temporary chair was receiving the salary, as I understand it, of the chair at the time. So it was troublesome. But even more than the divided vote, which went several times on that, the divided vote on whether to send to the people a local law shortening the term, to me, was the greatest problem with the having an even number of votes, because neither side gets to have its position move forward. It just doesn't happen. And because of that, as I mentioned earlier, we have people that are out of sync in representation. And that was due to a divided vote, 7-7. And that's one of the things that I personally wouldn't like to see continue.
We have Travis Brooks on with us as well as a member. Travis, do you want to share a thought on this?
On the number of legislatures?
Yes, odd or even.
I mean, obviously odd is easier, right? When it comes down to a close vote. We had a close vote on whether we send this back to the commission. I definitely understand the desire for an odd number. As a new person, we had one close vote, I believe, that could have been a tie. I'm not sure how that would have been dealt with. But I guess it's always easier if you have the ability to have a vote where there's a majority based on the numbers.
Well, the United States Senate reminds us of that from time to time as well.
Yes, they do.
Okay. Fine. Any further people need to chat about that particular item? We have the number of low-income persons in the proposed districts 1 and 2. Travis, that's the one that you mentioned earlier. I know that when the city group reviewed their proposal, the member of Common Council who has represented that area for some time looked to Cascadilla Street as a border which was being recognized by the North Side Civic Association as being appropriate. Also of the belief that the Washington Park area did not consider itself to be part of the North Side, but rather more a part of the central corridor coming down West State Street or Martin Luther King Jr. Street. And that was certainly the factor. I did raise before the concern that if an action was taken to separate low-income communities in the particular district, there might be people who would say that was an effort to diminish their relative voting impact on the district, even though they would then be in 2 districts rather than have relatively less voting impact than previously in the district that they had been in. So that, you know, was a factor in the city's determination.
Well, I'll share this. You know, the Greater Ithaca Activity Center was created 50 years ago because it was in response to there not being a community center on the north side. The north side house, the west side house had closed. The YMCA had burnt down and moved up in Lansing. And so, you know, for those who consider Washington Park not part of the north side, for over 50 years, GIAC has been the central hub of the north side. It's a north side community center. We take a lot of pride in being part of the north side. I've lived on the north side for 23 years, and we certainly consider that area part of the north side. I was thinking about what you said earlier about, you know, voting, and if you split the district, and do you take away voting power from the minorities? And my response is this: for 20 years, we've had a member of the legislature represent us. A member. Just one member for 20 years. It's 2 members of Common Council for the most part. To me, that doesn't give us a lot of say-so when it comes to county matters or city matters. We have 1 out of 14 votes, maybe 1 out of 16, right? And so there's only one person in the county that's responsible to hear our voices, and they get 1 vote. Just 1, in a predominantly white county. So when it comes to being marginalized, we have 1 person with 1 vote for all county matters. To me, that's being marginalized. Having 2 people, 3 people, having to hear us rally and raise concerns and advocate for things and possibly vote on matters that are really important to us probably is a little more helpful than having 1 person vote on all matters. So I get the idea of being disenfranchised, but we really have been disenfranchised for a long time with 1 vote out of 14. So I like my odds better when I have 2 or 3 people possibly advocating for me rather than 1 person. So I get it in theory, but in practice, we have 1 vote. So I don't know. I would prefer to have several people having to hear mouths of minorities when it comes to issues that are related to us. When we talk about housing, daycare, wages, when we talk about all these things, issues around poverty, there's one vote. There's just one. So I think that's an issue. I'm not saying that other members of the legislature aren't sensitive to these issues and don't fight for them and advocate for them, but only one person represents all of our voices. And I don't think that's fair.
I think you make a very good point. It's simply a factor that in the case law that's associated with redistricting, the problems of packing and cracking, and in this instance, the proposal to separate two community or a single community of interest, if you were to think of low-income persons, separating them consciously into more than one district could be a problem that somebody, challenges legally. Practically, I understand completely what you're saying, because it's the same argument that we used in the city for having a boundary line that went down Lynn Street, where persons who had been previously all in a single district were concerned that now the west side of Lynn Street was going to be in one district and the east side of Lynn Street would be in another. And we reminded them that, well, actually, where you had 2 members of Common Council before, now you're going to have 4. So I understand exactly what you're saying. Again, it comes down to trying to find movements among those census blocks to ensure that we have the population within the 5% deviation standard. And
Right.
It was felt necessary to do it the way we did it.
Understood. Would say in 16, we're adding one more housing complex. We're adding Overlook, right? So it's not that we're separating what currently is there. We're adding a whole nother housing complex, which is a good size one. So, and when I look at it, it's not separating what is currently there. It's adding another, and I think that's probably what sparked me more than anything, was this addition of another low income. So whatever district they were in before, that person was responsible for their voices, no longer had to be responsible for their voices. So that, I think that is what kind of made me look at this and say, wait a second, maybe there is something to review. So it wasn't that the Flats area or West Hill was split. It was one more was added to.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, just to follow up on Travis's idea, currently the legislature has 4 from the city out of 14, and you're going to go from 5 out of 16. The proposed 16 legislature picks up 1 in the city and 1 outside of the city. And I think you're right, it's additive. It's not cutting out anything. You're actually getting an extra body on the legislature from the city that you didn't have before. So I think that's a real positive.
I agree that is a positive, but here's the issue that I see with that. You still have one person responsible for all the low-income housing. Whatever you add, they're representing a different group. Their interests are different. So it may not add value, or it may not support that one person in that district. They may have a totally different agenda, because they're not representing people that are low income, no income. So, what your priorities are different.
Understood. Okay. Let me just ask a different question of Travis, if I can. Travis, were you part of the legislature at the time of the impasse?
I was not. I heard a lot about it. My supervisor was part of the legislature at the impasse. So I heard a lot about it, but I wasn't part of the legislature then.
Okay, I was, again, just trying to recall whether there were specific bills that had to be adopted that were not possible to be adopted because of the impasse, or fiscal actions necessary to the county that couldn't take place and ultimately didn't happen as a result of the impasse. Again, to the best of my knowledge from what we've heard, while frustrating, those problems were not fatal, if you will, to the work of the county legislature. Okay. And then compactness of District 1, again with the lower density of District 1, it causes it to be expanded geographically, given the concentration and growth of population on the east side, sorry, east toward the central side of the city. And I think the version that is in scenario 16 is as compact, relatively speaking, as the current connection of all of West Hill with South Hill. Any other comments on that?
Well, right now, it ends at the city lines. In 16, it goes out to the town line next to Trumansburg, correct?
That's correct. Up along the lake.
Yeah.
There are 540 people in that particular section, and it constitutes only 8% of the proposed district number 1. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I might just point out that of all of the different scenarios we're looking at, only 13 keeps the first district inside the city. Version 15, both versions 15 and everything goes outside. It bleeds out into the town. So I think it's going to be really difficult to try to keep it all within the city.
Well, now we've had our examination of alternative maps 11, 13, and 15 districts. My question to my colleagues is whether any of you want to recommend one or more than one of those alternative options to the county legislature for consideration. Or should we, since we have reaffirmed our belief that version 16.3E meets all of the criteria that have been established for us, that we should simply reaffirm our recommendation to the county legislature for the 16 district proposal. Comments?
Chairman, if I may, I'm not a member of the committee, but I would just observe.
We always defer to the county attorney.
I don't think we can overemphasize what a game changer the reduction of the 10% rule to the 5% rule was. It just changed everything. And I worked in a couple of these issues before, and not only did it change everything, it did it on short notice. As I understand it, some counties began this process of redistricting. And if I have my memory correct, Westchester County already had redistricted at 10%, and Monroe County said, no, we think it's 5%. So it was late in the day. It was really a very, very significant change. And people just haven't gotten used to the consequence of this, is what I think is happening here. So it gets us districts that are closer in number, but it's created other deformities, if you will, as to how we go about this. So I think there's, for many of the concerns I'm hearing, there's a pretty straightforward answer of why it's happening. It's because the state legislature and the governor wanted to get down to 5%, which over time may be the best thing we've ever done. But it came as a surprise to many of us as we began this process.
Thank you, Bill. Well, as I've said before, we've tried to balance the multiple criteria that have been set for us in the municipal home rule law, often referred to communities of interest and political subdivisions. Political subdivisions include ward boundaries, for instance, in the city, but it's certainly town lines across the rest of the county. And to the degree that we were able to do that in 16, I think we maximized the value associated with that. Is it perfect? Obviously not. But given the, again, the alternatives, let me just ask if any of you have a recommendation to make concerning some of the alternative maps that we've had under consideration tonight, and whether any of those should be recommended to the county legislature. Anyone? No?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion that after due consideration and extensive staff time, that this redistricting commission reaffirms its recommendation for 16V3-E, and that be the only map that would be sent to the legislature.
I would second that.
Moved by Jeff, seconded by Marcia. Discussion. Vivek. You're muted, maybe?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I would just like to say that the version 16 that is by far the best, and from a statutory standpoint, it is sound, and I think we should be reaffirming it. It's the other alternatives have their own sets of problems, and we have deliberated extensively before we decided on version 16. I believe it's 3E. I would strongly support that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, we have a motion before you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Looking, Chuck, is that a yes with you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any opposition? No? Carried unanimously by the commission. With that having been done, any other comments anyone would like to make for the good of the order?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank our staff for putting up so much extra time. They did a great job the first time around and a great time the second. Our county attorney for sitting in all the meetings, and Brittany keeping us all on track. It's been a very productive team effort, and I just think that we ought to recognize all the effort that those folks have put in for the 6 months. I mean, my God, geez, that's a long time.
Here. Again, echo that overwhelmingly. If not, no other comments? If not, a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor? Aye. Done. Great, thank you, Svetla.